Cafiel Traven, a 35-year-old aerospace engineer with an impeccable career at the Federation Space Agency, never imagined that his first contact with an alien species would take such an unexpected turn. It had been a routine morning at the operations base in Terra Prima, the capital of Earth, until alarms began to blare incessantly. An unidentified object had descended rapidly from orbit and landed in a field on the outskirts of the city. He was chosen as part of the first contact team, which included diplomats, scientists, and himself as a specialist in advanced space engineering technology. As the team's ship approached the landing site, Cariel felt his heart race. Despite years of simulations and preparation for events like this, nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness. Upon landing, the team stood before a futuristic-looking craft. Its surfaces shifted colors and patterns that defied any known logic. When a side door opened, tall, slender figures descended from the ship, their skin fluctuating in hues ranging from blue to violet. The Mirbak, an alien race unknown until then, presented themselves. At the front of the group stood a female figure whose gaze immediately locked onto Cariel. Her bright blue eyes quickly scanned Cariel's figure, pausing for a moment on his face and then his waist. An awkward silence hung in the air, interrupted only by the wind whipping through the field. Without warning, Solara's words escaped her lips. Although slightly distorted by her translation device, she said, "That you have between your legs is functional." The air thickened with tension and surprise. Cariel felt discomfort wash over him. His perplexed companions were unsure whether to laugh or intervene. Cariel cleared his throat, trying to buy some time while his mind struggled to process the situation. He had anticipated questions about their technology or culture, but not something so direct. "Well, our anatomy is quite a private topic in our society," Cariel began, attempting to sound as professional as possible. "Perhaps we could start discussing other aspects of our biology before addressing those topics." Solara, her skin undulating between colors that Cariel began to interpret as curiosity and confusion, nodded slowly. "Understood. I didn't mean to offend. It's just that in our culture, reproduction is a collective process. I was intrigued to know how humans function." Behind Solara, more Mirbak approached, and the situation began to seem more surreal with each passing minute. The tension was palpable. But Cadiel knew he could not afford to lose control of the conversation. He briefly glanced at his companions, who continued to observe the interaction in disbelief. Trying to redirect the conversation, Cariel continued, "Perhaps we can discuss our technologies further. I'm sure we can learn a lot from this exchange." Solara's face broke into a slight smile, and her skin changed to a warm green hue. "I'm eager to learn more, Cafiel Traven. Though our forms may differ, our minds can meet in knowledge." Despite the strange beginning, the exchange between them seemed to relax, but something within Caliel told him that this first encounter was only the beginning of a much deeper, potentially dangerous journey. Cafiel Traven could not shake off the odd conversation he had just had with Solara, the Mirbak diplomat. As the human team temporarily retreated to their improvised operations base near the landing site, the engineer mentally reviewed what had transpired. Despite the direct and awkward nature of Solara's question, something about her had piqued his curiosity. There was something almost innocent in the Mirbak's attempt to understand humans. Yet, at the same time, that strange fascination could lead to diplomatic complications if not handled carefully. The mission leader, Ambassador Gerald Irons, watched the interactions with a critical eye as teams from both sides began discussions on potential exchanges of technology and knowledge. Cariel approached the ambassador, pulling him aside. "We need you to stay close to Solara. She seems to have a certain interest in you, though it's somewhat unusual. You could help us gain ground with them." Cariel felt not surprised by the request, but also not entirely comfortable with the task. "I understand, Ambassador," he replied, forcing a smile. "I will do what is necessary to ensure everything goes smoothly." Back on the Mirbak ship, Solara observed her companions. For them, arriving at Terra Prima was not just a diplomatic mission. It was a pivotal moment in their galactic exploration. Their race had been traveling the far reaches of space for millennia, but they had rarely encountered a species as intriguing as humans. Their biology was so distinct, and their social customs were even more bewildering. The Mirbak were accustomed to a reproductive system based on symbiosis, where several individuals collaborated in creating life. The idea that humans did everything so intimately fascinated and perplexed Solara equally. Determined to learn more, Solara approached Cariel. When the humans returned to the exchange area, her skin had turned a soft amber color, a hue that Cariel began to recognize as her sign of curiosity. "Cariel Traven," she said softly, her translator struggling to keep up with her voice. "I would like to know more about your culture. Not just about biology, but about how your relationships function. How do humans relate to one another?" Cariel, having already prepared for more awkward biological questions, relaxed upon hearing the direction of the conversation. "Well, Solara, humans are very diverse in our customs. Relationships, both personal and professional, vary greatly from culture to culture on our planet." As they spoke, Cariel noticed that Solara was staring at him intently, not to intimidate him, but as if she were trying to deeply understand beyond his words. He decided to give a response closer to his life. "In my case, as an engineer, much of my life revolves around my work. But that doesn't mean there isn't space for personal connections. In fact, many of my colleagues balance their responsibilities with relationships, whether friendships or family." Solara tilted her head, her eyes narrowed as if analyzing each word carefully. "In our case, family is not like yours," she replied. "There is no nuclear family in our society. We raise young ones in groups without a direct connection to their creators. That would be strange for you." Cariel pondered before responding. "For many humans, yes, it would be. In our culture, family often serves as the foundation for many relationships. It's curious how such a difference can lead our societies to develop in such distinct yet equally complex ways." The atmosphere between them grew increasingly relaxed as their conversation continued. The naturalness with which Cariel and Solara exchanged questions and answers made both feel as though something profound was unfolding. It was not just a conversation, but an exchange that went far beyond what they had both anticipated. Cariel realized he was learning as much from her as she was from him. As they walked together toward an outdoor rest area, Solara suddenly stopped and looked up at the sky. Following her gaze, Cariel saw the Mirbach ship shining in the afternoon sun. But something else caught his attention. A series of red flashes flickered in the distance near the horizon. They were not natural. "Kal-El," Solara said, her tone serious and her skin quickly shifting to a deep violet. "Something is wrong." Cariel grabbed his communicator and sent an alert to the ground team. "This is Cariel Traven. We've detected unidentified activity east of our position. Requesting confirmation." The communicator crackled with interference before Gerald Iron's tense voice responded. "Received, Cariel. We have the same readings from here. The base defenses are active, but something is approaching at high speed. Prepare for what's coming." Before he could react, an explosion shook the ground beneath them. Prepara, Cariel and Solara fell to the ground, and when they looked up, they saw a dark ship descending from the sky, its threatening silhouette bristling with heavy weaponry. Solara quickly got to her feet and activated a device from her suit that emitted a protective field around them. "They are not Mirbach," she murmured, squinting her eyes. "This is something much worse." With his heart racing, Cashel drew his plasma pistol, readying himself for what seemed to be an imminent attack. But something deeper resonated within him. It was not only his responsibility to protect his own, but he now felt a bond with Solara and her people. They were in this unexpected alliance together, and they would have to fight to maintain it. War had apparently come much sooner than expected. The roar of the explosion echoed in Cariel's ears as he stood up, brushing the dust off his suit and trying to calm his racing heart. Solara, now standing beside him, was quickly activating her alien communication device, trying to connect with the rest of her team on the ship. Her skin had taken on a dark, almost black hue, which Cariel recognized as a clear sign of alarm. "This isn't part of the plan," she said, her voice low and controlled. Despite the chaos unfolding around them, the dark ship descending from the sky bore no insignia or signs of being part of an allied force. The scanner readings indicated that its weaponry was charged and ready to fire. Cariel nodded, glancing at his team who were frantically rushing toward the camp's makeshift defenses. Among the diplomats, scientists, and soldiers, panic began to set in, but Gerald Iron's quick orders managed to maintain some degree of control. Cariel knew they could not rely solely on their defenses. They were at a disadvantage in both armament and numbers. "We need to move," Cariel suggested, pointing toward a series of nearby rock formations that could offer some cover. Solera nodded, her eyes still fixed on the enemy ship. "They're looking for something," she said, adjusting her gear, "and I don't think they'll leave without finding it." The two quickly slipped into the shadows of the rocks as the sound of the enemy ship's engines roared louder. From their position, Cato saw a series of figures descending from the ship, moving with an agility that was not human. They were tall, clad in exotic armor that shimmered under the sunlight, wielding weapons that Cato's cell did not recognize. But one thing was clear. They were not there to talk. "Do you know who they are?" Cariel asked, keeping his gaze fixed on the newcomers. His hand gripped the plasma pistol tightly, ready for any eventuality. Solera studied the invaders with a look of concern. "I can't be sure, but their armor bears the style of the Arakas, a mercenary species. They've been known to work for various factions across the galaxy. They are extremely dangerous." Cariel frowned. The name was unfamiliar to him, but any species willing to attack a diplomatic first contact had ill intentions. And now, with both the human and Mirbach teams trapped between the rocks and the ship, the situation could only worsen. A second explosion shook the ground, this time closer, and Caparel instinctively crouched as another blast echoed behind him, sending debris and dust into the air. The Arakas had begun firing without warning, and the human defenses barely managed to repel the initial attacks. "We need to get back to camp!" Cariel shouted, but just as he was about to run, Solera stopped him, her eyes shining with determination. "We can't face them head-on. We won't survive if we try. But if we can reach my ship, we can activate a force field that will keep them at bay long enough to regroup and plan a counterattack." Cariel nodded, knowing they didn't have many options. As the gunfire continued around them, they stealthily moved toward the Mirbach ship, dodging debris and the patrols of Arakas that had been deployed. The two managed to get close to the landing area, where Solara's ship still stood intact. However, several Arakas were setting up devices around the ship, clearly looking for ways to disable or sabotage it. Kalel held his breath and looked at Solera. "Do you have a plan to deal with them?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the mercenaries. Solera nodded slowly, pulling out a small device from her suit. "This is an electromagnetic pulse grenade. If I throw it near those devices, it will temporarily disable them, but we need to synchronize perfectly to get into the ship before they can rearm." Cariel nodded, watching the movements of the mercenaries and preparing his pistol. "Give me the signal when you're ready." Solera threw the grenade, and the pulse that followed was silent but devastating to the enemy technology. The Arakas' devices sparked and shut down, giving Cariel and Solera just the time they needed to run toward the ship. The mercenaries, taken by surprise by the sudden failure of their equipment, took a few seconds to react. "Inside, quickly!" Solera shouted as they both entered the ship, and the interior panels illuminated, confirming that the force field was activating around them. The glowing shield expanded, forming an impenetrable barrier that covered the ship's perimeter. For now, they were safe. Cariel leaned against a wall of the ship, trying to catch his breath, while Solera checked the systems. "This will only keep them away for a while," she said. "We need a long-term solution, or they'll find a way to breach the shield." "Can you communicate with your team in orbit?" Cariel asked. "Maybe they can send reinforcements or evacuate our people." Solera nodded, adjusting her communicator and sending a signal to her mothership, the IR Redan. But the expression on her face tightened as she received the response. "The IR Redan is under attack as well," she said grimly. "We're alone for now." Cariel cursed under his breath. The situation was worse than he had imagined. With the Arakas attacking both on the surface and in space, they were caught in a deadly pincers. "Then we have no choice but to fight," Cariel said, a renewed determination in his voice. Solera nodded, her skin shifting to a deep red, a sign that she was ready for combat. "We will fight together, Cariel Trevin, and it won't be easy. But I trust we can overcome this." Cariel nodded, preparing his pistol as he reviewed the ship's layout and its surroundings on the holographic screen. There weren't many options, but they had to act quickly. Before the Arakas found a way to disable the shield, time was against them. But the collaboration between human and alien was their greatest advantage. They were ready to face the storm. The tension in the air was palpable. Inside Solera's ship, Kafil adjusted his gear and checked his weapon while his thoughts raced. The Arakas were outside, lurking, searching for ways to break the shield protecting them. Meanwhile, communications with the ground team confirmed that they were being overwhelmed on other fronts. The attack had been swift, unexpected, and brutal, and their only hope of survival depended on their ability to devise an effective strategy. "We don't have much time," Solara said, her skin changing from reddish tones to a deep purple, which Cataniel had learned to interpret as a reflection of her extreme concentration. "These mercenaries are not known for giving up easily. We need to buy time, or find a way to neutralize them before they reinforce their attack." Cariel nodded, his mind quickly evaluating the options available. He knew they couldn't just stay behind the shield and wait. The Arakas would eventually find a way to disable it. What they needed was an offensive maneuver, something they wouldn't expect. "If we could weaken them enough, maybe we could break their lines and reach the main ship," suggested Cariel, pointing out the weak points in their formation on the ship's scanners. "We know the Arakas don't usually use advanced defensive technology, so perhaps we can take advantage of that." Solara looked at him, her eyes shining with a spark of hope. "We have something that might work," she said as she rummaged through one of the ship's compartments. From there, she pulled out a small metallic box that Kafil had not seen before. Upon opening it, she revealed a series of cylindrical devices that looked sophisticated. "These are quantum distortion generators. We use them to interfere with navigation systems in space battles, but they could also be effective here on the ground. We could throw them at strategic points to confuse their weapon systems." Cariel examined the devices with interest. "That could work. If their systems fail for a few minutes, we might have the chance to move and launch a surprise attack." Solara nodded, adjusting one of the devices and activating it. "We'll have to go out of the shield to place them. If we can scatter a few in key positions, we could create enough chaos to take the initiative." The plan was risky, but they had no other option. Cariel and Solara quickly prepared everything, ensuring the distortion generators were ready to be launched. Once they exited the force field, they would be completely exposed, but success depended on speed and surprise. With everything in place, Cariel took a deep breath and nodded at Solara. "I'm ready." "Then let's go," she replied, her skin glowing with a vibrant shade of determination. They temporarily deactivated a small section of the shield and slipped out, moving swiftly among the shadows of the nearby rock formations. They knew the Arakas were patrolling the area, but the mercenaries did not expect humans and Mirbach to take such a bold action. As they approached the first position, Cariel felt adrenaline coursing through his body. He stopped behind a rock while Solara threw the first distortion generator. When it hit the ground, the device began emitting invisible waves that interfered with the scanners and systems of the Araka troops. Cariel watched as one of the mercenaries checked his weaponry in frustration, confused by the sudden failure. "It works," Cariel whispered, a satisfied smile on his face. "Let's keep going." Before they could be discovered, they quickly moved to the next position, launching more distortion generators in key areas. As they did, the Arakas appeared increasingly disoriented, their weapon systems becoming unpredictable. The shots that had once been precise now missed, and their formations began to crumble. Casariel seized the opportunity. "Now is the time. Let's head for the main ship." Both dashed toward the perimeter where the Araka ship was landed. The mercenaries, still struggling to regain control of their systems, did not react quickly enough. Solara fired her weapon, neutralizing two guards who tried to intercept them. Cariel, for his part, used his plasma pistol to cover their advance, shooting at enemies who were attempting to reorganize. When they reached the Araka ship, Cariel realized they would need more than brute force to get inside. "There must be a weak point in the ship's systems," he said while examining the nearby panels. Solara nodded and began analyzing the controls. She said finally, finding a flaw in the security systems. "We can overload the circuits from this panel and open the doors." Cariel watched as Solara worked quickly, her hands moving with precision over the alien controls. In seconds, the ship's doors opened with a metallic click. They rushed in, knowing time was not on their side. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was stifling, with dim lights and a constant hum resonating through the corridors. Cariel and Solara moved stealthily, aware that any encounter with the Arakas in their own territory could be fatal. Upon reaching the command center, they found what appeared to be the commander of the Araka group, an imposing mercenary with even heavier armor than the others. His face, hidden behind a helmet, showed no emotion as he watched the two human and Mirbach intruders the commander said in a deep voice that echoed off the walls. "I did not expect such audacity from you, but this is where your resistance ends." Cariel raised his pistol, but before he could fire, Solara stepped forward with surprising speed. With an agility that Cariel had never seen before, she took down the commander with a precise blow to his armor, momentarily disabling his defenses. "Don't underestimate our alliance," Solara said firmly. With the commander neutralized, Cariel quickly accessed the ship's controls. He knew they had to do more than just win the battle. They needed to disable the ship before reinforcements arrived. "I'm going to overload the ship's systems," Cariel said, typing rapidly on the controls. "This should render it completely inoperable." Solara watched him with a satisfied smile. "Do it quickly. We don't have much time." As the systems began to overheat, Cockleeel and Solara quickly retreated from the ship. The Arakas, now disorganized and without their main ship, had no choice but to fall back. The ship's explosion resonated across the battlefield, and with it, the immediate threat of the Arakas had been neutralized. Cariel allowed himself a sigh of relief as he watched the wreckage of the ship engulfed in flames. "We did it," Solara said, her skin now a bright blue hue, clearly relieved. "But something tells me this isn't over." Kal-El nodded, gazing at the skies. He knew the Arakas were not the only danger they faced. This had only been the beginning of something much larger. The sky over the battlefield was stained with the burning wreckage of the Araka ship, and the disoriented and disorganized mercenary troops were quickly dispersing, leaving Cariel Traven and Solara as the victors. But despite the immediate relief, both knew that the victory, though significant, was not the end of the conflict. Cariel watched the horizon as his team's scanners confirmed that the remaining Arakas were retreating. The battlefield began to calm, and the sounds of gunfire and explosions faded, leaving behind an unsettling silence. "We've won this battle, but we don't know how much time we have before they return with reinforcements," Cariel said, lowering his plasma pistol and turning to Solara. "We need to return to base and solidify the alliance between our peoples. Otherwise, this will only be a temporary victory." Solara nodded, her skin still glowing with blue tones that reflected relief mixed with concern. The Arakas don't easily abandon their contracts, but this attack, their urgency, makes me think they didn't come just for us. There's something more at stake." Together, Cariel and Solara returned to the makeshift base, where Ambassador Gerald Irons and his team awaited them anxiously. The base was visibly affected by the attack. Several vehicles were destroyed, and personnel worked feverishly to repair the defenses. "I'm glad to see you both alive," Ambassador Irons said as he saw them approach. "This attack was unexpected. We've contacted the Federation, and reinforcements are on the way, but they will take at least a couple of days to arrive." Cariel nodded as Solara spoke in her language through her communicator, coordinating with her mothership to ensure a safe retreat. Both knew that the key to their long-term success lay in something more than military strength. Diplomacy and the alliance between humans and Mirbok were now more crucial than ever. "Ambassador," Kaimiel said, addressing Irons, "the alliance with the Mirbok must be formalized immediately. We've seen what the Arakas are capable of, and what they could bring. We need to be united if we want to survive." The ambassador looked at Cariel seriously, then at Solara, who was watching him with determined eyes. "You're right," Cariel replied. "This attack has made it clear that we are not alone in the galaxy, and that the threats are larger than we thought." As the team worked on preparations to formalize the treaty between humans and Mirbok, Solara approached Cariel. "This is just the beginning, Cariel Traven," she said quietly, "but what we've done here today will not be forgotten." Cariel looked at her, nodding slowly. "No, it won't. We've started something that could change the fate of both species." As night fell, an improvised ceremony under the stars took place, where human and Mirbok representatives gathered. Ambassador Adion and Solara, as representatives of their respective peoples, signed the first interstellar cooperation treaty between humans and Mirbok. The promise to exchange technology, knowledge, and resources was just the beginning of an alliance that would forge new bonds in the galaxy. As the stars shone above them, Cariel looked at Solara. He knew their work was far from over, but the connection he had forged with her and her people gave him hope. Together, they had faced a common threat, and although the future was still filled with uncertainty, they now had the confidence that united, they could face it. "Do you think this will really change things?" Cariel asked, watching as the lights of the Mirbok ship orbited above them. Solara smiled, her skin glowing with a soft, golden radiance. "I don't think so, Cariel. I know so. This alliance is just the first step toward a future none of us had imagined." With a smile, Cariel allowed himself to relax, at least for a moment. He knew there would be more challenges ahead. But as long as Solara was by his side, and with the power of the alliance between their two peoples, the galaxy seemed a less hostile place. And so, under the vast immensity of the universe, Kagalaxiel Traven and Solara watched the dawn of a new era of cooperation between species, certain that whatever happened, they would face the future together.